Hi, everyone, and welcome to Resource Revolution, the resource management podcast. I'm your host, Christine Robinson. On this podcast, we will discuss the real-life experiences of people in and around the world of resource management. Our guest today is Lauren Davison, Senior Resource Manager. In this episode, we'll zoom in on the resource management process within the legal sector. This is an area where we're seeing rapid growth investment and a real increase in the recognition of the function of resource management and the value that it brings. So Lauren, your cross-sector background, you've been in medical, finance, Big Four, and now law. It really puts you in a unique position to offer some insights on how resource management compares and evolves across different industries and firm sizes. So I'm really excited to get into this topic, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
No, thank you so much for having me. Definitely would say I've dabbled in a few different sectors and learned a lot from each of those sectors. So yeah, happy to be here to discuss that today.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I have a lot of questions to ask. I'm really interested in this. I know for my background, I've certainly grown up within the accounting, the audit, kind of accounting world, consulting from an RM standpoint. So I'm super, super interested how you've seen that translate in the law industry. So again, you've worked in a number of different sectors, right? What drew you to resource management in the first place? How did you get involved in this wonderful field of ours?
I guess being completely honest, I fell into it really. I was fresh out of university and was in a job that I didn't particularly like at the time. So I had a contact at the medical company that I ended up working at. And they said, we just need somebody who can look at kind of rota planning and prioritizing like the needs of the business, looking at where we can, create efficiencies. And I've always been like an organized person. So I thought, I'll give it a go. And I guess, as they say, the rest is history. So I did very much kind of fall into this profession by accident, but I think it's definitely one that I've thoroughly enjoyed. I've been doing it for nearly 10 years now, so yeah, I think the career definitely found me. All the other way.
I like that. Yeah, resource management has certainly found a number of us, I would say, in these conversations, and it's funny. It's we attract it, right? We attract certain things into our lives. When somebody first meets you and they say, what do? You tell them, resource management. I know in my experience, people are like, oh, is that HR? Is that recruiting? Or sometimes they think it's something environmental, which sounds really interesting, but is wrong. So what do you do? And how do you explain to someone that has never heard of this before? They say, what is resource management? What do you do? How do you explain that?
Yeah, I have had this conversation with my friends quite frequently, and they probably still couldn't tell you what I do. So yeah, I normally just say to people, I go into businesses to create efficiencies and better ways of working, helping people with career ambitions and aligning kind of strategic goals of the companies with keeping people in mind and keeping them at the forefront of what we're doing, because that's not always kind of possible. So I think having someone who can hold the business accountable and make sure that they are kind of sticking to what they say, and yeah, working with be like a real business partner. So some of that goes over their head, some of it they understand. But yeah, I think in one of my most recent kind of interviews that I got asked what would my elevator pitch be. So It was just the right people, the right place, the right time, and the right skills. So that's kind of my tagline when I normally talk to people about what it is that I do. And like I say, some people it lands, others they've still got no idea, but I will keep trying to tell them, and hopefully the message will hit home soon for them.
Oh no, I hear you. I love that. I think it's interesting to hear your perspective on that. I think it was really well said. There's a few things, that sticks out for me there. And the overarching piece is that resource management is sadly not very well known, right? If you tell someone you're a lawyer or a doctor or an astronaut, they know what that means. But you say resource manager and you kind of have to give a little backstory to explain that. So you touched upon a couple of things that really resonated with me. I love the idea of holding the business accountable. That is a huge part of successful resource management. So I'd love to kind of explore that more as we continue our conversations. But I would really be interested, and I know our listeners come from various different backgrounds, different levels, different parts of the world, really, even from a resource management perspective. So I'm curious, tell us about the differences that you've noticed between how resource management operates in the big four, mid-tier firms, the legal sector. You've seen a lot of different things. What have been the big things that stuck out to you?
I think for me, it's kind of the evolution of the function across those firms. I would say I started in Big Four, where it's definitely embedded, it's understood as its own function, and the business really understands the value of what you can bring. I guess then to kind of like mid-tier, they are, I would say, probably a little bit newer to the function as well. It's something that in my last role, I went in and it was new to them, so I helped them kind of set it up. They understand the concept, and it's important to them, but it's just that change piece, managing that change with the business and allowing them to see that you're there to work with them, not against them. So I think that's probably the change I saw from going to Big Four to mid-tier. And then into law, I would definitely say into legal, it's again another change where I think it's still so new, it's in its infancy, so it's very much an unknown, but an exciting unknown for them. And they're definitely, the driver for it is definitely the wellbeing piece of resource management and the pastoral care and the D&I aspect of what we do, which is quite nice. It's not kind of been driven solely by commercial values or wanting to impact in that way. So I think that's definitely been how I've seen it. Is I feel like in that sense I've taken a backward step a little bit in time, where I'm going from something that's well embedded and a function that's in its own right working with the business to something that's now in its infancy, and trying to compete with those firms and looking at how they can make those changes so that they can be competitive and retain talent. So it's really interesting to see how firms really want to embrace that now and really want to implement those changes to benefit the people that they employ. So I think that's definitely the difference we've seen across the different kind of sectors I've worked in. But yeah, I think each of them has definitely brought its own learning curve, as you'd expect.
That's really interesting, and you touched upon a couple of things there that I'd love to hear more about and expand on. It's so refreshing to hear that people-centric focus. I love that word well-being that you use. That's sort of a real unique but very positive part of the resource management process. And unfortunately, that doesn't always come to the forefront. There's a lot of reasons for that, right? I don't think generally people don't wake up in the morning from a leadership perspective and hope to have people have a bad experience, right? That's certainly not the goal, but it becomes difficult. And I get it, right? You're trying to meet the business case. You have, certain utilization, productivity, revenue metrics, and I get that. But that being said, I think it's a really interesting lens by which to view resource management, and in particular resource management in the law sector. So going back to our listeners, and one of the things that really has been a prevalent theme, not just on this podcast, but really in any conversation that I've had with probably any resource manager, is this idea of career path, right? And how do you really navigate that? Because it is not completely set, right? We're not we in a lot of ways have this sort of juxtaposition of working in usually fields that have a very defined career path, but we don't have one necessarily, right? We're kind of on the outside looking in. And so I love this idea of, as you described, the big four. And I've had this experience, right, where there's a really robust sort of well-oiled machine process that's been in place for a long time. And then I have been fortunate to have that position of really being able to design the process. So I love hearing about that, because a lot of times in resource management, what I have found, and I'm curious your opinion on this, is that people are usually in one or the other, meaning they're sort of this cog in this wheel of, look, there's this process. I'm part of this gigantic organization and I'm really executing on this process. And a lot of times that's great because you learn a lot, and you learn a lot about efficiency and how things should be, which is very different then starting from scratch and designing a process. And I don't know a lot of resource managers and resource management leaders who have been on both sides of the fence. So I know that's of interest. And I believe that a fantastic career path, it's not the only career path, but a career path within resource management is that, right? Getting your feet wet, learning about that, knowing what that's like, and then taking that to another setting. And to your point, maybe that's law, maybe it's a mid-tier firm. That was my experience. But using that to not only design a process, but have a hand in shaping, right, what that looks like. And so I'm curious, is that something that you experienced? Were you able to make that shift easily? Is that what you wanted to do? Was it good for your career? You know, if you had a choice right now, would you go back and say, no, I would have wanted to stay in Big Four and that's the only thing I would have wanted to do? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I think I mean, I definitely wasn't looking for it. It just found me, and I'm glad it did. I think you know, being in Big Four and even mid tier, like, you learn so much that once you've learned it, you kind of, you know it, you can do it, you can replicate it. And I think that's what I've kind of done in this role that I'm in currently. I've taken what I've learned across probably like the last 8 years of my career to bring in resource management as its own function to the team that I'm supporting. That by no means I already know everything, because it's absolutely not the case. And the way that legal works is very different to kind of like your Big Four environments that I was used to, because just like yourself, Christine, I was in audit. So very much was used to kind of like the structure of audit and the, you know, the cyclical behavior of it. Whereas moving into a different sector has definitely challenged what I know about resource management and how to apply it to different sectors. So yeah, I think it's definitely been a steep learning curve, in the sense of you are the advocate for resource management and you are talking to people that don't really know much about it. They kind of get the concept, but it's about not just implementing processes, but also selling the hearts and minds, you know, winning across the stakeholders, working with the business to improve processes. And you actually just learn so much on the job, and you think, oh yeah, I know so much about resource management. And then all of a sudden you don't, because you're in an environment that's different. The principles of resource management stay the same, but how the business apply it and how they work and kind of what they follow, their processes, is so different, and the structure is so different. But I think experiencing both, I would definitely say the role that I'm in now is preferred, because it's allowing me to kind of grow in my role and challenge myself, maybe have opportunities that I might not have had at Big Four. I don't know. So yeah, I think it's definitely been interesting, and I think why I've maybe pursued it a couple of times, because in my last few roles, that's what I've done. I've, you know, been given the opportunity to go in and start something, you know, new, or refresh something that already existed. So yeah, I think it's definitely been the most exciting part of my career. And but not to discredit, you know, what I learned when I was in the Big Four, because without that, I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in today with the knowledge that I've got from working there. So yeah,
it really resonates with me, because that has been my experience, truthfully, as well, right? Again, being in a different sector, in a different part of the world, in a different environment, but that's my story, right? And I think the more that I talk to more senior people in resource management, I hear a lot of that, right? I hear a lot of that sort of coming up, getting that training, and then taking off the training wheels and going into an environment where you have to design it. And I think what's interesting about that is nobody teaches you how to do that, right? So you're in an environment where you're learning how to execute, you're learning how to deliver. And do you improve the process incrementally year after year? Absolutely, right? Any organization is going to want you to do that, but it's a very different thing to go and sort of be consultative and assess the situation. I mean, when you think, it's funny, you know, if you look at any traditional consulting template, right? They have the current state assessment, right? And then they, you know, set up the target operating model, and then they work through that change management process, and they put together milestones for the deliverables. And in a lot of ways, resource management leaders who are hired, and by the way, this happens a lot, especially in some of the smaller firms, regardless of industry, is they'll bring someone on that has this experience, and they'll say, great, set up a resource management process. And that person while they might know up to their eyeballs how to do resource management, what they haven't necessarily been trained in is how to actually develop that process. And you said something so important around this idea of changing hearts and minds, right? And kind of winning people over. So let's talk about that, because I think, in my opinion, one of the most overlooked parts of a successful resource management process is change management. I really feel very strongly about that. And I can hear in your voice kind of the passion around that. So let's talk about managing change at work. How does that come into play, at least in your experience, in terms of actually setting up a robust resource management process? Because I imagine that you didn't start on your first day and you said, this is the process, and everyone just complied. I'm guessing that's probably not the way it works. So tell us about that. Why is it important? How did you do it? To just educate us.
Yeah, and so I guess no, it definitely wasn't like that on the first day, but you wouldn't expect that. Something that's brand new, everybody's of course going to have a little bit of wariness about them. So I think just even now, it's still just getting to know the teams, understanding how they work and the work they do. That's a massive thing. That was a big learning curve for me, moving into the legal sector, and just working with the teams to get. So they have to trust me, right? They have to know that what I'm saying is what I'm going to deliver. A lot of it is about engaging with the stakeholders, and that's not just partners, that's trainees, that's associates, it's everybody at every level, and the business support teams as well, so that they can start to see how resource management really can also help their day job become a little bit easier too. It's about how we collaborate, and kind of bringing them along without sounding too cliche on that journey with you, so that you're, doing it with them, not for them. So I think that's what's really important for me in the, the last 12 months, is about talking to those stakeholders, understanding their wants and needs, and not forcing something on them that's not going to work. So like I said, working at Big Four, it was quite structured, and I obviously understood the team I was with and how they worked and what they wanted. Starting something from scratch, you have to understand that for everybody, and then find the commonalities and how we're going to best make it work. And we can't make everyone happy 100% of the time, but if we can make them happy 50% of the time, 60% of the time, then I think the 40% compromise is pretty good statistic to go with. So
yeah, I that really resonates as well, because one of the things that makes, in my opinion, resource management so challenging, but also so rewarding, is when you do find those commonalities, right? I was actually, so I do some coaching in this area, right? And I was talking with someone who has it's not in its infancy, but their process is now at the point where they're needing to level up, right? Their firm is growing, and they need a little bit more rigor and discipline around the process. And I remember and I get it, it is such a struggle. It is so hard, right? Because everyone wants something different, and everyone, especially from a leadership perspective, typically thinks that their area, whatever their piece of the business is very unique, and, has special processes that no one could ever, understand. And I get that. That is really hard. But I think the trick to that, at least in my experience, has been, you need to have consistency in terms of the results, but not necessarily having consistency just for the sake of having consistency. And now a word about our sponsors, Dayshape. Do you ever feel like your team spends more time managing spreadsheets than getting actual work done? If you're a strategic leader in a professional services firm, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Say goodbye to the chaos with Dayshape. Dayshape is an AI-powered platform that takes the stress out of resource management. Imagine scheduling, planning, and staffing all being handled in one smart system that actually understands your business. Sounds too good to be true? Believe me, I dreamt of having this type of technology when I was a resource management leader. It's like having a superpower for your firm, boosting productivity, profitability, and even employee happiness. Plus, it seamlessly integrates with your existing tools, so there's zero disruption. Do you want to see the magic in action? Check out dayshape.com and see how your resource management function can be elevated to a more strategic position. Trust me, your team and your CEO will thank you. curious your opinion. The end result needs to be the same. For example, take any metric, whether that, let's say utilization, right? If you have a utilization target, perhaps you just need a target. It maybe doesn't need to be the same target for every single part of the practice, because maybe they're doing different type of work. Maybe it's just maybe some parts of the organization are expected to do more business development, and that's not necessarily directly chargeable, right? So again, I'm not going to pretend to know what every single resource manager in the world's pieces of goals are and what they need to report on. But the idea is maybe just changing the mindset around, look, we need to have the ability to report on something like utilization and the ability to forecast. But in some cases, we may only be able to forecast 3 months out. In others, it's like 2 weeks. And in others, you can do, like in an audit practice, you can almost do a year out, right? Because you're able to do that. So I'm curious, and this is I'll say this is a tactical question. This is not a strategic question, but it's just to satisfy my own curiosity selfishly. So when I think about what you must have on your plate in the legal sector, I'm fascinated by the idea of exactly what is that. And when I say what is it, I don't mean like the strategic, like what the value is of resource management, because we know about that, right? We'll talk about that a little bit more. But I'm curious, in the accounting space and the consulting space, you'll get some very specific requirements or desires, let's say, in terms of skill sets. What are those in the legal? Like you get a request, and what is being requested? Is it levels? Is it certain types of? I don't even know. I've never worked in law before. Like what is it? I'm so curious.
It is very different.
I bet.
Yeah. So I think obviously if we just take audit, for example, you'll get your budget, your clients, how many hours you need, what level staff you need. And then, some circumstances you could be left to your own devices and create the team. It's all fine and dandy and it's all done. In legal, it's very much on the individual. So they report their availability to the resource manager. And it's not, it's not it's so easy to forecast on that. So, we can't give at the moment like a 6 month or 3 month forecast. So yeah, they are very much responsible for their own workload in the sense that they manage their clients, they work together in smaller teams. So that's one thing they're definitely trying to break the cycle on in creating a better national working, cross office working, cross practice group working. So it's very much self-service in that sense. And the way that resource management kind of supports that is in looking at supporting those requests where a partner might have a new matter. So that's what their work is called. It's a matter. And they might need a team and they don't know what they don't know. They don't know who they don't know. So it's about how can we support them in building a team that's the best for their client, geographically, financially, in terms of progression, how we can support individuals, and then also helping them grow their networks organically, just because I think in legal, it's very much in the history book, tap a person on the shoulder who's sat next to you and they can help you. And that's kind of what they want to move away from, instead of, having lawyers who are burnt out because there's somebody constantly going to you. They want to spread that workload equally across the offices, give people a better workload distribution, make sure that teams are equally utilised. So some of the, aims and goals are the same. It's just they are very much focusing on the wellbeing aspect of it as well, to stop kind of like that burnout that they can experience. And just working for kind of like people-focused businesses is definitely a plus when it comes to resource management. It just helps kind of elevate that platform for you so that you can kind of explain to them how we're here to help. But yeah, definitely very different to your typical Big Four.
So in a lot of ways, it's not different. In a lot of ways, a lot of what you described is very similar in terms of the process, maybe, and the results, and the maybe philosophy, I would say, around the execution and delivery of what you do. But in many other ways, it's different, right? The way you go about executing that is interesting. And so it's so fascinating, right? I mean, I know So in an audit world, let's say, I mean, I remember being a junior-ish resource manager. I was kind of on the front lines, like doing the staffing. A manager would come and say, hey, you know, I need a senior. And I just need someone who like is really good at with spreadsheets. They need to be able to like use macros and, you know, run macros and do a VLOOKUP and this and this. And it was just like this very kind of specific. Do you get that in the legal space too? Not necessarily in spreadsheets, but do they say I need this specific thing and this specific thing? Like, what are those things? I don't even know in the legal world.
Yeah, I guess they are very, you know, specific. If the deals that they're doing requires, you know, certain elements of, so I support like the real estate team. If it requires certain, you know, elements of looking at leases or working on something particular for the client, they definitely want people to have that experience. But again, it's about them not knowing how to best put that forward. So, you know, one part of what I've had to do is come in and build like a matrix for them and show them how we can display skills and build that into kind of like work type codes, which is how they charge their time. So it's just showing them how we can kind of like create efficiencies from what already exists. So yeah, I think that definitely is still a similarity, I would say, where they are quite, you know, specific and they want someone who can do this type of thing, but they're also then interested in somebody who wants to learn, somebody who's interested, and equally the other end of the scale, somebody who's not interested because they've not done that before. When you get to, you know, a certain level of seniority, you're not, you know, you kind of know your path, you know where you want to go. You're not interested in what you're not interested in. So they're not going to make that and force that to happen. It's one, you know, not good for morale, and two, definitely not cost effective because there will be a learning element of it. So yeah, I think there's definitely some similarities in that sense. But again, it's just about, because it is so new to the teams, how we explain that and put that forward to them.
Yeah, that is tremendously significant as you think about this idea of, so I think there's a real difference between having a resource management process and having a good resource management process, right? One that works. And I imagine, not to put words in your mouth, you know, you tell me, but I imagine that you my guess is that you probably had to establish a number of processes or put into place at least just certain tools or mechanisms. Maybe it's a flow chart even. Tell us about that. Is there a certain piece of maybe a process or technology or whatever it might be, even if it's a way of engaging, maybe setting expectations, that you've introduced that have been either really beneficial or changed the game a little bit, or even one that had some initial resistance? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I say, I definitely took some plays from probably the archives of resource management. So we, you know, the teams, they didn't have any consistency in terms of how they forecast, in terms of showing their own individual capacity. So something so simple, but is so daunting to some teams. So yeah, it was just about coming in and creating consistencies there where we could have one way of showing how busy our teams are. That was not something that they kind of shared or collaborated on. So we've been working on trying to get together something that we can share nationwide so that teams now can start to work a lot better together, collaborate more, and kind of get to know people that they might not have known before. So something very basic, but has taken, you know, a couple of months to get up and running, just because of the changes that you've got to do along the way in terms of like hearts and mind piece, which we've just discussed, to get them on board with what you're trying to do and show them that it's something very simple, but actually something very impactful, because you can see everything together instead of separately and siloed, which then allows us to work better together as a team. So yeah, that's where we're up to at the moment, because I've only been in post 7 months now. So it's, you know, first couple of months on board and now we're into the trenches of introducing a new way of working and then rolling out resource management tech a bit further down the line into the back end of the summer and autumn. So yeah, it's a very exciting couple of months ahead, just very busy and daunting in terms of what we've got to do with the teams.
Oh, I bet. And it's interesting. So I'm going to pause you there because I think it's really fascinating to give our listeners sort of a behind the scenes look at what those two different paths are, because as we were discussing earlier, right, there's and it doesn't just have to be Big Four. That's an example, but it's that traditional model where a process has existed and you're being brought into something that has already been there, right? And you're learning it. That is, and by the way, that's a fantastic career path. I know many people that have been very successful in that way and have a very fulfilling and high level of job satisfaction, right? But it is different than what you just described. So if anyone is in that part of their career where, and I do think, to use your words, Lauren, you do have to reach a certain level of seniority, right? You don't do this after your first 6 months, right? You've been in the role, you kind of know the ropes, you walk the walk a little bit, you know what you're talking about as it relates to everything from skill sets, inventories, to strategic staffing matters, and dealing with, I would say, possibly emotionally charged leadership conversations that happen quite frequently, in our role. And there's almost this fork in the road, right, that you hit where it's like, look, do I want to continue here? Or do I want to maybe explore one of the, and that's what happened to me. When I went to a smaller firm, it was uncharted territory for me. But what you just described, I mean, you said 7 months, and look at everything that you have done, in 7 months. It's a very different thing. Now, in my opinion, and I'm curious what you think, I believe it takes, first, let's back up. I believe that it takes a certain, I'd say, personality and characteristics and attributes to not just do resource management, but to like resource management. So I think that's the first thing. And then within that, then there's this idea of, well, what type of resource manager are you, right? Are you the one that kind of wants to stay in this area? The formerly mentioned sort of big four kind of model. And is that really what excites you, and you want to iterate on those processes? And I think what's very fulfilling about that is that you've got the critical mass there. I mean, some of these organizations have like 300,000 employees, right? And so it's an enormous amount of influence and having the power of the firm behind you, which is very different than the very rewarding path as well of kind of shaping that. So I'm curious, what do you see as the difference there? If someone said to you, hey, I've been in this role, for, let's say, 7 years, and I'm thinking about my next career move, and I'm thinking about whether I want to stay in this environment, which certainly has a career path, or, I see all these roles. There's these smaller firms that are hiring for a resource management leader, and I don't really know what it's about, and they've never had resource management before. What advice would you give them in terms of the differences between those things, how they can assess what's right for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I absolutely agree with what you say, like, staying in an established function that's, been running for years, and you're just joining and learning from that. I think I absolutely could have enjoyed my career doing that, staying within already established teams. I think what got me into taking the jump, because it was a jump, it was the excitement of creating something that hasn't been created yet. So within, obviously, legal, there's going to be all of the firms that are wanting to implement resource management, and it will all be done in, how the firm wants it to be done. And I think that's what's exciting to me, is that I'm part of making that stamp on, the resource management implementation, and making it work for the person I am. Because I absolutely agree with what you said, is that it does take a type of person to be in resource management. You can teach the skills that come along with it, but I think you have to have a real passion for people. I think that would be what my advice would be, is a leap into the unknown is scary, but it's definitely paid off, and it's something that I genuinely do enjoy, and something that, when no 2 days are the same, and even the smallest steps are the most exciting steps. It seems like some days are just very small wins, but actually it's still a win. So they should all be celebrated. And like you say, if you look back in even 7 months, from where we started, we've made that progress, and you've gone from being part of a team that's responsible to being the individual that's responsible. And I think that's what's the exciting part, is that if this works, or when it works, I will be part of that responsible team who have made it work for the firms that we're working with. So yeah, I think it's exciting as it is scary. I'd definitely say that much.
It's so true. And I appreciate you sharing that with us, Lauren, because it is really hard to evaluate that. It's such a daunting thing to be in that part of your career where you're like, what am I supposed to do? And you want to take the next step, but you don't know what it is. And you don't really know what you're stepping into. And let's face it, a half-hour interview does not tell you everything you need to know about the organization. So I really do think that's really helpful insight as people are thinking about that. And I mean, quite frankly, it probably applies to almost any industry, but in the profession of resource management, especially because we don't have a whole lot of, I guess I'd say, role models, right? Or proof cases, where people have done this type of thing. And that's what we're all about, right? Is sharing these stories. So leaving on a high note, I love that. Now, we wrap up every episode by asking the guest these same two questions. So number one, would you be able to share a mistake that you made at some point in your career and what you learned from it?
Yeah, so I think mistake, I've definitely made a few. But the one that I can think of is probably from my very first role, where I was a resource planner and working for a medical firm. I forgot to check where one of the scanners was and didn't staff it in time. So they nearly had to cancel that service. But what I learned from it was to be honest and, go to my manager, speak to them about it. And actually we managed to fix it in the end. So if I hadn't have shared that information, we might have been in a situation where we'd have lost some money and had some very grumpy clients and customers. So yeah, I think that was one mistake that I definitely learned very quickly, is to be thorough. But yeah, it all works out in the end. So I guess that's the main point.
I hear it. Ooh, that one got my heart pounding a little bit. Yeah, I've definitely been there where it's like, oh no, especially when I was junior, I freak out and just act like the whole world was, going to come down on me. But you know what? That is how you learn, right? They say honesty is the best policy, as they say. All right, second question. What is the best piece of career advice that you've ever received?
I would say that is, I think the best piece of advice I've ever received is trust your instincts, because I think in the role that we're in, our instincts are pretty good. Our intuition's pretty good. And I think, it's served me well so far. So I think trusting my instincts is definitely the best piece of advice I think I've ever been given across my career. So yeah, I'm definitely glad to share that piece of advice.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, you get that gut feel, right? Well, listen, I think a lot of resource managers have that, as my very young son says, kind of that spidey sense. You kind of know, what's going on, and you kind of look into that. I love that. So, Lauren, it has been so good talking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And with that, we'll wrap up our conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please help others discover our show. So follow, like, or subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Resource Revolution.